Mara did not plan to make a scene. She had planned everything else: the dress, the taxi she could barely afford, the exact angle at which she would hold her chin when Dorian Hale finally looked across a room and saw what he had let go. She had planned the smile. She had practiced it in her bathroom mirror 3 times that morning, which was 2 more times than she would ever admit to anyone, including herself. What she had not planned was losing a heel on the front steps of the Ashgrove Gala, catching herself on a stone pillar, and arriving inside the most expensive ballroom she had ever entered with one shoe slightly shorter than the other. She stood in the doorway for 3 full seconds, took in the scale of the room, the chandelier that was probably older than the country, the white-gloved waitstaff moving through the crowd like chess pieces, the string quartet playing something delicate and European in the far corner, and made a decision. Nobody saw that. She was moving. That was what mattered. The ballroom was the kind of place that existed to make people like Mara feel the distance between themselves and people like the ones in this room. Every surface gleamed. Every woman's neck held something that caught the light and threw it back. Every conversation was conducted at a volume that assumed the walls were listening and had opinions. The air smelled like old flowers and older money. Mara adjusted her wrap, straightened her spine, and walked in like she belonged there. She did not belong there. She found a champagne flute on the nearest tray and took it before the waiter could offer it, which was apparently not how things were done here, because the waiter gave her a look that said he had noted her name in a mental ledger titled People to Observe. She gave him a nod that she hoped looked confident. It probably looked desperate. She moved on. The plan was simple: find Dorian, let him see her, look like she was having the best evening of her life, leave. She had not accounted for the fact that Dorian would be so easy to find. He was near the center of the room, surrounded by the kind of glow that comes not from lighting, but from the way certain people stand in rooms, as if the room has been built around them. He had a new haircut. He was laughing at something a woman beside him had said. The woman was tall and wore a green dress that probably cost more than Mara's rent and looked like it knew it. Mara stopped moving. Her champagne glass paused halfway to her mouth. She stayed like that for a moment that was probably only 2 seconds, but felt like the kind of time that does something permanent to a person. Dorian laughed again. His head tilted the way it always did when he was genuinely amused. She had spent 2 years memorizing the difference between his polite laugh and his real one, and this was the real one. She turned around and walked in the other direction. This was not running away. This was strategy. She needed a new position, a better angle, a more interesting piece of the room to occupy when he eventually spotted her. She needed to look like she had arrived somewhere rather than fled somewhere. She moved through the crowd, excusing herself past a man who was 3 conversations deep and not listening to any of them, sidestepping a group of women who were doing the thing where they laughed loudly enough to be seen rather than heard, and aiming for the far side of the room where the crowd thinned and the candles were grouped on a long table beside an arrangement of white flowers. She was almost there when it happened. She turned her head, a completely automatic action, the kind of neck rotation that happens when you think you hear your name, and walked directly into something solid. Not a wall. Something warmer than a wall. She stumbled back, caught herself, and felt a hand close around her elbow before the stumble could become a fall. Her champagne survived. This was the only thing she could say with certainty in the 3 seconds that followed, because everything else was momentum and embarrassment, and the process of recovering her balance in a room full of people who definitely saw that. "I'm so sorry," she said, to the jacket lapel that was approximately at her eye level. It was a very well-made jacket. Even in her current state of mortification, she could tell that. Black wool, no visible seam at the shoulder, the kind of tailoring that cost exactly as much as it looked like it cost. "I wasn't looking. That was entirely my fault. She looked up. The man holding her elbow was looking down at her with an expression that was not annoyed and not amused, and not the polite blank face that rich people wore when they were deciding whether someone was worth speaking to. It was something quieter than all of those things, attentive in a way that felt slightly unusual, the way you notice a sound you can't immediately identify. He was tall, not unreasonably so, but enough that she was aware of the vertical distance between them in a way that she wasn't always aware of with tall men. His hair was dark, his jaw was the kind of specific that made her think of old portrait paintings, and his eyes, she caught this before she caught herself catching it, were the color of amber held up to firelight, not brown, not gold. Something in between that had its own name in a language she didn't speak. "Are you hurt?" he asked. His voice was even, not warm exactly, but not cold. It was the voice of someone who said what he meant without decoration. "No," Mara said. "I'm fine. I'm genuinely so sorry. I think I went temporarily directionally impaired, which is a condition I apparently have now, and she stopped herself. Thank you for catching me." He released her elbow, not abruptly but with a careful, deliberate quality, as if he was making sure she was steady before he let go. She was. She had been for at least 2 seconds, but she had not said so. "These floors," he said, glancing down briefly, "are not kind to heels." Mara looked at her feet. One shoe was still slightly lower than the other from the step damage at the entrance. She felt the very specific embarrassment of a person who thought they had gotten away with something and had not. "I lost a heel on the front steps," she said, because lying about it seemed worse. "I have it in my bag. I'm currently operating at a structural disadvantage." Something happened at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile, the edge of one, the beginning of something that decided not to become a smile but left a trace of the intention. "That's practical," he said. "That's one word for it." She looked at him for a moment. He was still looking at her with that same quality of attention that she couldn't fully categorize. It wasn't the way men usually looked at her at events like this, which was either with disinterest or with the specific interest that came with invisible strings attached. This was something different, like he was reading something rather than evaluating it. "Are you enjoying the evening?" she asked, because someone had to say something and apparently it was going to be her. "No," he said. She blinked, honest. "You asked." "Most people say yes," she said, "or some version of it. Something about the lovely music and the lovely flowers and what an honor it is to be invited." "Is that what you were going to say?" Mara looked around at the chandelier, the strings, the crowd, Dorian 30 meters away laughing with a woman in green. "No," she said. "I was going to say something diplomatic. You've disrupted my diplomatic momentum." That edge at his mouth returned, a little stronger this time. She was starting to like it. She extended her hand the way you extend a hand when you have been raised to do so in formal settings, even when one of your heels is in your purse, and you walked into a stranger at a gala. "Mara," she said. He looked at her hand, then he took it and his grip was firm and brief and his hand was much cooler than she expected. Not cold, not alarming, just cooler than the room which was itself slightly warm. "Calyx," he said. Just the one name, no title, no last name offered, no context. She waited a beat to see if more was coming. It wasn't. "Just the one name?" she asked. "For now," he said. She let that sit because she wasn't sure what to do with it, and because the string quartet had shifted into something slower, and the crowd had thinned slightly around them, and she had just noticed, in her peripheral vision, that Dorian was now facing in her direction. She did not look directly at him. She knew with a bone-level certainty that he could see her, and that he was watching, because she had spent 2 years in close enough proximity to Dorian Hale to know what it felt like when his attention moved through a room and landed on her. It felt like being watched by someone who had not decided yet what they thought. She was not going to turn around and look. She was going to stand exactly where she was, and she was going to keep talking to the man with the amber eyes who had 2 things Dorian Hale no longer had: physical proximity and her full attention. The plan had been vague when she arrived. It became specific very fast. "Calyx," she said, as if testing the name, and in fact she was. "I have a favor to ask. It is a slightly strange favor. You can say no." He waited, no performance of curiosity, just the patience of someone who had somewhere to be and had decided this was more interesting. "My ex-boyfriend," she said, in the careful, even tone of someone reading aloud from a document they have emotionally detached from, "is currently somewhere behind me, almost certainly watching, and I made the deeply questionable decision to come to this specific gala tonight wearing this specific dress and this specific expression of a woman who is doing absolutely fine." She paused. "I am doing absolutely fine. I just thought that if I were talking to someone tall, someone who looks like he has never in his life done anything he wasn't completely certain about, it might help the visual." Calyx looked at her for a long moment. "You want me to be a prop? A conversational prop, a human context clue? You can keep all your opinions and personality, yes," she said. "I want you to be a prop. Briefly, I'll owe you one." She was aware that this was an insane thing to say to a stranger at a formal event. She was also aware that she had already walked into him, announced her footwear situation, and admitted to a complicated interior motive for attending a gala, and that the evening had apparently decided to be the kind where she said things out loud. Calix looked at her for another moment, then very calmly he said, "What kind of prop did you have in mind?" Mara felt something loosen in her chest, just slightly. The specific tightness that had been sitting there since she bought the dress and told herself she was fine began to ease at its edges. "Just standing here talking. Like we know each other." She glanced down at her champagne, which was almost empty. "Maybe a bit of light laughter if you can manage it, nothing forced." "I don't do forced laughter," he said. "Good, neither do I, so will be extremely convincing." He took a glass from a passing tray. Not champagne, something darker, something that looked like wine but sat too still in the glass, which was probably just the lighting. He held it without drinking it and looked at her with that same quality of attention that was beginning to feel, oddly, like the most honest thing in the room. "Tell me something true," he said. "About what?" "Anything." His eyes moved briefly past her toward the center of the room, then back. He's still watching. She did not turn around. "I figured. You're not nervous." "I'm extremely nervous," she said. "I'm just very good at looking like I'm not. It's one of my few genuine skills." She looked at her glass. "That and parallel parking. I'm outstanding at parallel parking." The edge of his mouth, there it was again. "The other skill," she said, "in case you were curious, is I can tell when a room is pretending. This room is pretending extremely hard tonight." "What is it pretending to be?" he asked. "A celebration," she said, "but it's actually a competition. Every single person in this room came here to win something. The music and the flowers and the champagne are just the costume the competition wears." Calix considered this with the expression of a man who has heard many things and is deciding where to file this particular one. "And what did you come here to win?" Mara looked at the white flowers on the long table beside them. One petal had fallen onto the cloth, and nobody had moved it. She focused on it for a moment with more attention than it required. "I came here," she said slowly, "to look like I already won." He was quiet for a moment, not the polite quiet of someone waiting to speak, actual quiet, the kind that had weight. "Is there a difference?" he asked. She picked up the fallen petal and set it to the side of the arrangement. "Ask me at the end of the night," she said. Somewhere across the ballroom, the string quartet finished one piece and began another, something slower, something that spread through the air like smoke. Mara's champagne was empty. The room was very bright. Dorian was still there, still watching, and she knew it the way you know about weather before it arrives. She looked at Calix. He was looking back at her with those amber eyes that held something she couldn't quite name. Age, maybe, not in the way a person looked old. In the way a place looked old, like it had seen many seasons pass through the same window and had stopped being surprised by any of them. "You're not from here," she said. It wasn't a question. "No," he said. "Where are you from?" He looked at the room around them. At the chandelier, at the old stone walls, at the portraits in their heavy frames on the far wall, faces looking out from a different century with expressions that had not aged. "Further back than this," he said. Mara looked at him. "That's a strange answer." "You asked a strange question." She turned it over in her mind, and something about it felt true in a way she couldn't locate the edges of, a feeling like pressing your finger against a bruise you didn't know you had. She decided to let it go, because some things were worth holding and some things needed space, and she was not yet sure which kind this was. The music moved through its first slow measure. The crowd shifted and swelled, and somewhere behind her, she felt the particular sensation of Dorian Hale's attention like a thumb pressing against the back of her neck. She stood very straight. She looked at the man in front of her, the one who had caught her before she fell, who had said yes to a stranger's strange request without asking why, who had given her one name and no explanation, and whose eyes held something that looked, for just a moment, like recognition. She wondered if he was as good at pretending as she was. She thought somehow that he was not pretending at all. She thought that might be the most interesting thing about him. The evening was still early. There was still time for the plan to work or to fall apart completely. In her experience, the only things that produced good stories were plans that fell apart. She held her empty glass and let the music fill the space between them and waited to see what the room would do next. On the other side of the ballroom, Dorian Hale watched. He always watched. That was one of the things she had learned about him, that he was very good at looking like he wasn't paying attention and very bad at actually not paying attention. His eyes found her the way water found a low point. He couldn't help it. She had never decided whether that was love or something that looked like it from far away. From here, though, from the far side of the candlelight, she looked like someone who had arrived somewhere. And the man standing next to her looked like someone who had been there for a very long time. She straightened her spine, let one corner of her mouth lift, and raised her empty glass slightly, the way you raise a glass to no one in particular, to the room, to the evening, to the stubborn fact of still being here when some part of you thought you might not want to be. Across the room, Dorian's expression shifted. She couldn't see it from here, but she felt it. She decided, for the first time since she walked through the front door, that she was glad she came. She also decided in the same moment, without ceremony or announcement, that she was going to need another glass of champagne. She looked around for a waiter. The same one who had noted her in his mental ledger appeared at her elbow with a tray. He offered it without looking at her. She took a glass. He moved on. She looked at Calyx. "Drink," she said. He still had his glass, still hadn't touched it. "I'm fine," he said. "Right," she said. "The one-name man who doesn't drink." She tilted her head. "You're interesting." "You don't know that yet," he said. "I know it provisionally," she said. "I'll confirm it later." He looked at her, that edge again at the mouth, more than before, almost a smile. She sipped her champagne. The music played on. The ballroom breathed around them, all that old money and old stone and old competition dressed up in white flowers and candlelight. Dorian was still watching. She didn't look. She talked to the man with the amber eyes, and the man talked back, and the evening moved around them like water around two stones in a river, and Mara held her glass and kept her chin at exactly the angle she had practiced, and it felt, unexpectedly, like something that was not entirely performance. That part she had not planned. That part might be the most important part of all. She let it sit, the way you let a note hang at the end of a piece of music, just before the room decides what to do with the silence. The string quartet played on. Nobody moved the last fallen petal from the table. The chandelier held its light without effort, the way beautiful things do, as if keeping the world bright cost them nothing at all. Mara Voss stood in the room where she did not belong, and for the first time in 2 years she did not feel the gap. She felt instead something she would not name until much later, something small and specific, like a key turning in a lock she had forgotten she was carrying. She sipped her champagne. She waited. The evening was not finished with her yet. Neither, she suspected, was the man beside her. She was right about one of those things. She was also, though she could not know it yet, beginning to be right about the other. The second time Mara nearly fell, she was entirely sober, and the thing she walked into was nothing like a wall. She had been moving with purpose, a word she used generously, given that her actual purpose was to locate a bathroom that did not require navigating past Dorian Hale, his new companion, and the small orbit of admiring strangers that had collected around him in the 40 minutes since she had last registered his position. She had a route in mind. She followed it with the focused energy of someone who had made a tactical decision and was committed to it. The crowd thinned near the east side of the room, where the balcony doors had been opened to let in the night air, and the guests clustered in smaller groups, quieter conversations, candles burning lower in the draft. She moved through these spaces with a little more speed than was elegant, because elegance was something she had given enough of the evening to, and speed was, at this point, more practical. She turned the corner past a table of flower arrangements. She walked into something that did not move. Her shoulder hit it first, then her forward momentum continued without the rest of her, and she would have gone sideways if a hand had not caught her upper arm and held. Not a hand she recognized, not the same hand as earlier. She knew that even before she looked up, because this was different in its grip, not careful in the same way, not that specific quality of controlled steadiness. This was fast, reflexive, the way someone catches something before they have decided to catch it. She found her balance, pulled back slightly and looked up. She was back where she had started. Calyx Dren had apparently moved from the spot where she had left him, having excused herself to get some air and possibly locate a functioning heel. and had reappeared here, on the east side of the ballroom, near the open doors, holding her arm again. She stared at him. "Are you following me?" she asked. "You walked into me," he said. "Again," she said. "Again," he agreed. She looked at him. "Do you just stand in paths? Do you not watch where you're going?" "I watch where I'm going. I watch extremely carefully. I simply sometimes choose routes that involve collisions with you, apparently, which is a new development in my evening." She straightened herself and pulled her wrap tighter against the cooler air from the balcony doors. "What are you doing over here?" "Walking," he said. "From where?" "Somewhere quieter," he said. He glanced back toward the center of the ballroom where the crowd was thicker and the music louder. "The room has a weight." Mara looked at the crowd too. She knew what he meant, even though it was an unusual way to say it. The room had a weight. All that performance, all that calculation, all those people looking at each other and deciding what each other was worth. After a while it pressed on you in a way that was hard to name but easy to feel. "Yes," she said. "It does." They stood for a moment near the balcony doors, the cool outside air moving around them gently. She could smell rain somewhere out there, not present yet but coming, the particular sharpness of a sky that had decided something. "He's still watching," Calix said. She had not asked. She had not looked. She had been very deliberately not asking and not looking for the better part of an hour, and she was not sure whether to be grateful that he was keeping track or slightly unnerved by the fact that he was. "He's very consistent," she said. "He looks like he's trying to understand something," Calix said. He wasn't looking at Dorian when he said it. He was looking at Mara. "Dorian doesn't understand most things," she said. "He is extremely charming and extremely smart about certain things, and completely unable to understand other things until they are no longer available to him." She lifted her champagne. "Then he understands them very quickly. That's usually when the understanding is no longer useful." Calix was quiet for a moment. "How long?" 2 years, she said, which sounds either short or long depending on whether you've lived any of them. "Long," he said. "Yes," she agreed, "long." She looked at the balcony doors. Beyond them was darkness and the smell of oncoming rain and the shapes of the garden below, lit by the spill of light from the gala windows. She thought about going out there. She also thought about the dress, and the fact that one of her heels was already compromised, and the evening had already produced enough material without adding "stood in the rain alone" to its inventory. She stayed where she was. "Tell me something else true," Calix said. She looked at him. He had this way of saying things without announcing them, statements that arrived fully formed without build-up or explanation. It should have felt abrupt. Somehow it didn't. "You keep asking me for true things," she said. "Most people at events like this only offer untrue ones," he said. "It gets repetitive." She laughed, a small one, genuine, slightly surprised. "Fair," she said. "All right, something true." She thought about it, not performing the thinking, actually doing it. "I didn't want to come tonight. I convinced myself I did, and I built a whole architecture of reasons that were technically accurate but missed the actual point, which is that I was afraid of exactly this, standing in this room, seeing him with someone else, feeling whatever this feeling is." She paused. "I don't know the precise name of the feeling. It's not heartbreak exactly. It's more like the feeling of a room after someone has moved the furniture. Everything is technically still there. It just doesn't look right from anywhere you stand." She stopped talking because she had said more than she intended. She was good at that, finding the right stopping point and occasionally missing it. Calix looked at her with those amber eyes that held their peculiar quality of having seen a great deal. "That's accurate," he said. "Have you experienced it?" "The furniture," he said, "has been moved many times." She considered asking what he meant. She looked at him and decided instead that he meant exactly what he said, and that she didn't know enough yet to translate it, and that some things were answers before you had learned the question. "Right," she said. The string quartet in the main room moved into something new. She could hear it from here, something sweeping, the kind of peace that filled the whole room and ran up the walls and settled in the rafters. The kind of music that announced that the evening had a purpose, and that the purpose was, among other things, dancing. She felt Dorian's attention from across the room again. She did not turn around. She looked at Calix instead. At the jaw and the amber eyes and the dark coat and the stillness of him, the way he stood, the way very few people stood, as if the ground beneath him was simply where he had decided to put his weight, and the world had agreed to it. "Calyx," she said, and his name still felt like something she was borrowing. "I have another favor to ask." "You owe me one from the first one," he said. "I know, I'm already in debt, I'm asking on credit." She looked at the floor, at the dancers already moving to the new piece on the far side of the ballroom, at the light on the marble, at the shadows the candles made. "Dance with me," she said. She said it quietly. Not a performance of the request, just the request itself, offered with both hands and no guarantee. Calyx looked at her for a long moment. The music filled the space between them. "Your ex is watching," he said. "I know," she said. "That's why you're asking." She thought about that, about the honest answer, which was more complicated than yes and less simple than no. "That's part of it," she said. "I'm not going to pretend it isn't, but it's not all of it." He looked at her. "What is the rest of it?" She looked at the dancers, at the way the room opened up around them when the music got bigger, the way the crowd made space, almost without deciding to, because some things required room. "The rest of it," she said, "is that I have been standing on the outside of this room all evening, and I am tired of standing on the outside of things. And you are the only person in this room who has said anything true to me, and who has not looked at me like I'm a thing to evaluate. And the music is very good." She looked at him. "And I think you might actually know how to dance." He looked at her for another moment. She couldn't read what was in those eyes, not fully, not yet. There was something there that was old in the way stone was old, something that had been accumulating in one place for a very long time and had gotten very dense. Then he held out his hand. Not with ceremony, not with flourish, just extended it open, waiting. She looked at it, then she took it. His hand was cool again, that same temperature she had noticed earlier, not cold enough to be alarming, just cooler than the room, cooler than her own. His grip was firm and even, and he led her toward the open floor without hurrying, without pausing to see who was watching. And she felt, for the first time all evening, like she was moving in the direction she actually wanted to go. They reached the edge of the dancing crowd. She heard, from behind her, from the direction she was deliberately not looking, the sound of a conversation pausing. Dorian was watching. She knew it the way you know about gravity, not by thinking about it, but by the fact that everything kept staying on the ground. She did not look back. Calyx placed his other hand at her waist, not close, not at a distance that required explanation, just exactly where it needed to be, and they began to move. The string quartet was playing something she did not know the name of but knew the feeling of. Something that had been composed by someone who understood that music was not just about melody, but about the space between notes, about what you felt when the sound went quiet for a moment, and the room held its breath. He was, as she had suspected, an extraordinary dancer. Not in the showy way, not in the way of someone who had taken lessons and wanted you to know it. In the way of someone who understood balance and weight, and the language of two bodies moving in the same direction, and who had learned that language so long ago it had become instinct. He moved without effort and with total precision. He led her without forcing her, which she had not always experienced in dancing or in other things, and she found that her feet went where they were supposed to go without requiring her brain to be involved. She let that happen. She let her feet follow and her shoulders drop, and her back straighten the way it only straightened when she stopped thinking about her back. "You're good at this," she said. "You're not bad," he said. She laughed, a real one, unguarded, highest praise. "It's accurate," he said. And then, very quietly, so that it didn't carry over the music, "He's still watching." She turned her head slightly, just slightly, not enough to be obvious, just enough to catch the edge of the room in her peripheral vision. Dorian was standing very still. The woman in the green dress was saying something to him. He wasn't listening. His attention was entirely across the room, entirely on her, and his expression was doing something complicated that she could not fully read from this distance, but recognized in the way you recognize a word in a language you used to speak. She turned back. She looked at Calyx. He was looking at her, not at Dorian, not at the room. At her, with those eyes that were warm and old and impossibly still. "Good," she said very quietly. She meant it. That surprised her. She settled into the movement of the dance, and the music lifted around them, and somewhere behind her, across the candlelit room, her past stood very still and watched her go. She had the distinct, specific, slightly terrifying feeling that she was not dancing for Dorian anymore. She was not sure precisely what she was dancing for now. She was not sure that it had a name yet. Names came later. First came the way the feeling always came first, before the words, before the understanding, before the moment when you looked back at the evening from somewhere on the other side of it and finally knew what it had been about. For now there was just the music, and the cool hand at her waist, and the amber eyes that watched her like something that had forgotten how to be surprised, and was, for the first time in a long time, discovering that it hadn't. The room turned gently around them. Dorian watched. The quartet played on. And Mara Voss, who had arrived at the Ashgrove Gala with a plan and a broken heel, and 2 years of something she hadn't named sitting quietly in her chest, danced with a man whose last name she didn't know, in a room she didn't belong in, and felt, for the first time in longer than she could immediately calculate, that belonging was perhaps not the only thing a room could offer. The chandelier held its light without effort. The candles burned. The music filled the space between all the things that hadn't been said yet, and the evening moved forward, as evenings do, carrying everything with it. They danced for 3 songs. Mara counted, not because she was watching the time but because the music arranged itself that way, 3 separate pieces, each one flowing into the next without a full pause, just that brief held moment between when the bow lifted from the string and when it touched again, a breath the whole room took together. She counted them the way you count things when you are paying very close attention to something else. The something else was the man she was dancing with. His name was Calix, and he had given her no last name, no title, no context. He danced without effort and without performance. He answered questions with things that were true but not quite complete, the way some doors opened partway to show you the room but not the whole room. He had cool hands and amber eyes, and the particular quality of stillness that she associated with people who had stopped needing to prove things to rooms. She was paying very close attention to all of this, and filing it away in the part of her mind that handled things she didn't yet know what to do with. The third piece ended. The quartet held its final note and then released it, and the room shifted, the subtle rearrangement that happened between dances, people moving apart, hands released, the specific small dislocation of returning to yourself after a few minutes of shared motion. Calix stepped back exactly 1 step. He let go of her hand with the same careful deliberateness with which he had taken it. "Thank you," he said. "I'm pretty sure I'm the one in debt," she said. "You danced well," he said, "debt cleared." She looked at him. "You're very easy to settle accounts with." "I've had practice," he said. She watched the way he said it, even, factual, nothing added. She turned the phrase over in her mind the way you turn over a coin to find the other side. She found it and then wasn't sure what to make of it. "I need water," she said, because she did, and because she needed a moment to do something with her hands that wasn't holding his. "And probably food. I think they have those very small things on plates somewhere." "Canapés," he said. "Those," she agreed. "The very small things on plates." He looked like he might say something, then he didn't. She moved toward the edge of the room, where a long table held water pitchers and more champagne and the small things on plates, which turned out to be something with mushrooms and something with smoked fish, and something that she suspected was very expensive but tasted mostly like bread. She took one of each. She poured herself a glass of water and drank half of it in one standing motion, and then stood with the glass and the small plates and looked at the room. From this angle she could see most of it, the dancers reforming as the quartet picked up something new. The clusters of conversation, the glasses being refilled, the quiet negotiations of who stood with whom and what that meant. She could see the doors to the garden, propped open, and the dark beyond them. She could see Dorian. He was looking at her. Not the way he had been looking before, from a distance, from the position of someone holding a comfortable margin between himself and the thing he was watching. He was closer now. He had moved. He was near the edge of the dance floor, and his expression had shifted into something she recognized from a very specific chapter of her recent history, the expression he wore when he had decided something and was moving toward it. She picked up another small thing from a plate. It tasted like nothing. She ate it anyway. Her name from behind her. Not shouted, quiet, the specific quiet of a voice that expected to be listened to because it usually was. She put down the plate. She turned around. Dorian Hale was standing 3 feet from her, and he was looking at her in the way she had spent 20 minutes constructing a defense against, which was with the full force of what he was, the jawline and the effortless shirt, and the eyes that knew exactly how to hold a person in place. He was looking at her like she was something he had just remembered he owned and had recently noticed was not where he left it. She hated that she noticed the jawline. She filed it away in the section of her mind labeled things that are true but not useful. "Mara," he said again, and her name in his voice was a whole specific thing, a whole specific shape that fit a whole specific space that she had been slowly trying to close off. "Dorian," she said. The word was even, not cold, not warm, even. She was proud of it. He looked at her for a moment. Then he looked in the direction she had come from, at the dance floor, at the space where she had been 30 seconds ago, at Calix, who was now standing at some distance, holding his untouched glass, watching none of them in particular with the quality of stillness that had nothing to prove. Dorian looked back at Mara. "Who is that?" he asked. "Someone I met tonight," she said. "You don't know him." "I know his first name," she said. "We danced, it was lovely." She picked up her water glass. "How are you, Dorian?" He blinked. She had done that, answered a question with a question in a way that folded the first question inside the second one, tucking it away before he could follow it further. He had once told her she was very good at that. He had not meant it as a compliment. She had taken it as one anyway. "I'm fine," he said. "You look good." "Thank you," she said. "You do too." This was true. She made it sound like a receipt, not a compliment, a record of fact. He looked good and she was noting it the way you noted the weather. He looked good and she felt nothing she needed to act on. She noticed this with the careful attention of someone checking a wound. It was there, the feeling, but it was not in charge. "I didn't expect you to be here," he said. "I was invited," she said. "I know. He stopped, looked again briefly in Calix's direction. "Mara, do you know who that is?" She looked at Dorian. He had a very specific kind of discomfort on his face that she had rarely seen there. Not the discomfort of jealousy, which she knew the shape of. Something more underneath that, something older and slightly sharper, like a note played in the wrong key that nobody in the room had acknowledged but everyone had heard. "I told you," she said. "I met him tonight." "His name," Dorian said. "Did he give you his name?" "He gave me his first name." Dorian let out a breath, short, controlled, but just barely. "Mara," he lowered his voice, not whispering but pitched for two people only. "Stay away from him." She looked at him. The room continued around them. The music, the candles, the glasses, the murmur of conversations that had nothing to do with this one. "I'm sorry," she said. "Stay away from him," Dorian repeated, and his voice had taken on a quality she had heard it take on before, a quality that sounded like concern but had the architecture of control underneath it. "He's not someone you want to be involved with, trust me." She waited the way you wait when you want to make sure the other person is actually finished speaking. "I find it interesting," she said then, very calmly, "that you're standing in front of me telling me who to be involved with. I find that interesting, Dorian. That's the word I'm choosing." "Mara, how long ago did you stop being involved with me?" she asked. 8 months, 9. "And now you're standing here, at a gala that I was invited to, telling me to stay away from the one person who has spoken to me tonight like I'm an actual human person and not a conversational decoration." She kept her voice even throughout all of this. She was very calm. She noticed she was very calm with a small separate part of her brain that was observing everything from a slight distance and taking notes. "I appreciate the concern. I don't require it." He looked at her. His jaw had done the thing, the tightening she knew. "I'm not trying to." "I know what you're trying," she said. She did. She knew exactly what he was trying, and she knew it not because she was angry at him, which she was not really, not in the way she had been in months 4 and 5 when the anger had been sharp and daily and necessary. She had used that anger like a tool, and she had used it well, and she had put it down when she was done with it. What she knew now was something quieter and cleaner, that Dorian Hale had a very specific relationship with things he used to have, and that things he used to have became interesting to him precisely at the moment they stopped being available. She had been something he used to have for 2 years. She was now something he was watching across a ballroom. The math was not complicated. "Enjoy the evening, Dorian," she said. She turned away. She moved across the room in the direction of the balcony doors. because she wanted the outside air and the smell of the oncoming rain, and because turning towards something felt better than walking away from something, and because the two were occasionally the same direction, and this was one of those occasions. She felt his attention follow her. She did not look back. Calyx was near the doors when she reached them, not waiting for her, not positioned to be seen waiting, just present the way he was present throughout the evening, without announcement, without effort. "He spoke to you," Calyx said. "He did," she said. "What did he say?" She looked at the garden below, at the dark shapes of hedges and paths and the distant gate, at the first very small drops of rain that were beginning to appear on the stone railing of the balcony. "He told me to stay away from you," she said. A beat and... She looked at him, at the amber eyes that held their ancient quality of stillness, that saw her with a directness that was not threatening, but was, in some way she hadn't fully named, the most honest thing she had encountered in a very long time. "And I found that interesting," she said. He looked at her. His mouth did the thing, the edge of something that wasn't quite a smile, but had begun to commit to one. "You use that word carefully," he said. "I use it precisely," she said. "Interesting is what something is when you don't know what it means yet, but you're going to need to know." The rain arrived, soft and even against the railing, against the garden below. Not a storm, just the sky deciding on something. Calyx looked out at it. His face in the rain light was very still. "He knows me," Calyx said. It was not a question. "Apparently," Mara said. "He didn't explain how." "He wouldn't," Calyx said, very quiet, very even. She waited for him to say more. He didn't, not immediately, and she let the silence sit because it was the kind that had content. "Then his family has a long memory," Calyx said. She looked at him. "And what does his family remember?" He looked at her for a moment. At her face, at the rain on the railing, at the dark garden below with its paths that led somewhere she couldn't see from here. "Old things," he said, "things that happened before you were born." She should have found that cryptic. She should have asked what it meant, should have pressed, should have done the thing she usually did when conversations offered closed doors, which was knock on them until they opened. She didn't. She stood in the rain-cool air at the edge of the evening and looked at the man beside her, and she felt, very quietly, the feeling of standing at the top of a staircase in the dark, not afraid, not certain, but aware. Aware that there were more stairs. Aware that the descent was going to tell her something. "Old things," she repeated, testing the weight of it. "Yes," he said. "And you're one of them," she said. He looked at her. He didn't answer. The rain said what it needed to say against the stone. And the evening, which had been one kind of thing when she walked in, quietly finished becoming another. Petra Langley found Mara at the vanity in the East Lady's room, which was a room that deserved a more specific word than bathroom. It had a chaise, it had a vase of fresh white roses, it had a small velvet-seated bench that nobody appeared to have ever sat on, and it had a large mirror in which Mara was currently studying her own reflection with the expression of a woman doing math. Petra sat down at the next mirror. She was perhaps 50, perhaps older, with the kind of cheekbones that got sharper with age, and the posture of someone who had never once questioned whether she belonged in a room. She wore pearls in layers and a dark plum dress, and she applied lipstick with the precision of someone who had been doing it for 30 years without missing. Mara had never met her before tonight. "You danced with Calyx Dren," Petra said, not as a question. Mara looked at her in the mirror. "Is that unusual?" "Extraordinarily," Petra said. She capped her lipstick and examined her reflection with satisfaction. "He doesn't dance. He doesn't attend events. He hasn't been seen publicly at anything like this in 11 years. Mara absorbed this. He seemed comfortable enough. "He always seems comfortable," Petra said. "That is one of the least reassuring things about him." Mara turned slightly toward her. "You know him." "I know of him," Petra said, with the specific precision of someone who understood the difference between those two things and considered it significant. "Everyone in certain circles knows of him. Knowing of him and knowing him are very different propositions, and very few people have experience of the second one." "What do people who know of him say?" Mara asked. Petra considered this the way someone considers a question they have been asked to condense. "That he is very old, that he is very private, that the title his family holds is," she paused, "complicated, There are two titles, technically. The public one, which is Duke of Ashgrove, which is the one that appears in records and on the kinds of things that appear in records. And then there is the other one. Mara waited. The one the old families use, Petra said. The one that does not appear in any public document, the one that is spoken quietly if it is spoken at all. She looked at Mara in the mirror. Her eyes were composed and sharp. I won't say it here. I'll simply tell you that there are people who have tried in the past to document him, to photograph him at private gatherings, to write about him in the kind of publications that write about old money and older families. And Mara said, and they have not tried again, Petra said. She said it pleasantly, not as a threat. As a data point offered cleanly like a fact about geography. None of them were harmed before you ask. That would be inaccurate. They simply stopped. They stopped being interested in the subject. They moved on to other subjects with a completeness that struck several observers as notable. Mara looked at her own reflection. At the woman in the mirror who had walked into this evening with a plan and a broken heel, and 2 years of something she had been carrying, and who was now in a room with velvet seats and white roses being told quiet things about the man she had danced with for 3 pieces and found interesting. What is the other title? She asked. I told you, Petra said. She stood, smoothing her dress. I won't say it here. Why not? Petra looked at her. The expression was not dramatic. It was not designed to create atmosphere. It was simply the expression of a woman who had lived long enough in certain rooms to know that some words changed the air around them when they were spoken. Because words like that have a way of arriving where they were spoken, she said. And I'm very fond of this room. It has a lovely chaise. She dropped her lipstick into her bag, clicked it shut and left. Mara stood alone at the vanity for a moment. She looked at the white roses, at the fresh petals, pale and perfect, slightly too formal for the container they were in, the way things were sometimes placed in rooms not because they belonged there, but because they completed a picture someone had planned. She looked at her own face. The woman in the mirror looked back with the expression of someone standing at an edge, considering. She thought about Calix, about the portrait she had not yet seen but would, though she didn't know it yet, about the way he held his glass without drinking from it, about the temperature of his hand, about the way Dorian, who was not easily frightened, had looked when he spoke his name. Old things, Calix had said. Things that happened before you were born. She touched the side of her own face. Her reflection did the same. She was not frightened. She made note of that, the way you make note of the weather before you go somewhere. She was not frightened, and she was not running, and she was not pretending. Those things together felt like the most honest inventory she had taken in the course of a long evening. She was interested. That was the word she kept coming back to. She picked up her bag. She straightened her dress. She looked at the white roses one more time, at their slight, preserved perfection, their careful cut stems, their arrangement that was beautiful and slightly lifeless in the way of things held too still too long. She thought of nothing in particular. She thought of amber eyes in firelight. She thought of a word she didn't know yet, and a man who had given her only one name. She went back out into the gala. The ballroom was still full, still bright, still playing its music and running its competitions in white gloves and good fabric. The chandelier was still overhead. The string quartet was still in the far corner, playing something she could hear but not name. She looked for Calix. She found him the way she had found him the second time, without having decided to look, without following a logical path across the room, just present somewhere in the peripheral field of her attention, and then suddenly in front of her, as if the room arranged itself. He was near the east corridor, not moving toward her, not positioned to be seen. Just there, the way he was always just there, as if presence were something he could place where he chose. He looked at her as she approached, at her face, at whatever the White Rose room had done to her expression. You look like someone has told you something, he said. Someone told me several things, she said. He waited. She said you haven't been seen at an event like this in 11 years, Mara said. Accurate, he said. She said there's a title no one will say out loud. He was quiet for a moment. Also accurate, he said. She looked at him. Is there something I should know? He looked at her for a long moment, at her face, which she kept still, which cost her something, because she was someone to whom faces came easily and cost her accordingly. Yes, he said. Will you tell me? Not here, he said. She almost laughed, not from amusement, from the clean absurdity of a room in which every person was performing something while the music played, and the candles burned, and the man in front of her held the kind of secret that made grown adults stop trying. Then where? She asked. He looked at her, the amber eyes were very still. There's a room, he said, at the end of the east corridor. It isn't on the floor plan. She looked at the corridor, at the dim space beyond the last lit doorway, at the dark beyond that. You want to show me a room that isn't on the floor plan, she said. I want to tell you what I should tell you, he said. Rooms like that hold conversations better than rooms like this. She looked at the ballroom around them, at the brightness and the noise and the managed spectacle of it, at Dorian, visible from here on the other side of the room, watching her again. She looked at Calyx. She thought about Petra's face in the mirror, and the words she wouldn't say, and the way she had touched her lipstick as if needing something familiar in her hands. She thought about the feeling at the top of a dark staircase, about the part of her that was not afraid. Lead the way, she said. And he did. And she followed. And the ballroom continued behind them, bright and loud and certain of itself, holding all its competitions in both hands, and the music played on and the candles burned, and nobody in the room noticed when they stepped out of the light and into the corridor together. Nobody except Dorian. He noticed. He stood very still and watched the space where she had been, and his expression did something that had no performance in it at all, which was the most honest thing his face had done all evening. He was afraid. The corridor was quiet in the way that rooms are quiet when they have been quiet for a long time, and the quiet has settled into the walls. Mara walked beside Calyx through the dimly lit passage, away from the gala's noise, and the sound changed with each step, the music thinning, the conversation dissolving into something the walls held rather than something the air carried. The corridor was lined with dark wood paneling and framed things she couldn't see clearly in the low light. Paintings, she thought. Portraits, maybe. Eyes looking out of frames at angles that watched without blinking. She kept her footsteps even, one heel slightly shorter than the other, which she had stopped noticing except when she noticed it. How do you know this house? She asked. Thoroughly, Calyx said. Have you been here before? Often, he said, a long time ago. She let that sit. She was getting better at letting things sit. It was one of the skills the evening was teaching her. At the end of the corridor there was a door. Dark wood, heavy handle, no label, no indication of what was inside. Calyx opened it without hesitation, without looking for a key, without any of the small negotiations people usually had with doors they were unfamiliar with. He opened it the way you opened a door in your own house, with the specific ease of a person who knows exactly what they'll find on the other side. She walked in. The room was large and still and smelled of old paper and beeswax candles, and something else she couldn't immediately name, something mineral, something dry, the smell of a room that had kept its air for a very long time. A fireplace on the far wall held a low fire, burning without being asked to, and the light it threw was warm and orange and moved against the walls with a slowness that was almost contemplative. There were bookshelves, floor to ceiling, the full perimeter of the room, the kind that required a sliding ladder and probably had one somewhere behind the dark. There were chairs. There was a table with no chairs around it, just the table alone in the center of the room, which had the strange quality of furniture arranged for a purpose that predated the furniture's current arrangement. And there was a portrait. She saw it before she saw anything else, or it came forward in her attention before the other details did. On the wall above the fireplace, in a frame that was heavy and dark and old, a portrait. A man in formal clothing that was not the clothing of this decade or the last, in a setting that was indoor and formal, with the kind of expression that portraits had in centuries when sitting for a painting required patience, and portraits were made to outlast the people in them. She looked at the portrait. She looked at the man. She looked at Calyx. She looked at the portrait again. The light from the fire moved across it, and in that movement it breathed, the way painted things breath sometimes when you looked at them long enough. The face in the frame was the face in the room. The jaw, the stillness, the eyes that held their particular color even in oil paint, even in the age-darkened medium of a painting that was very old, amber, warm, unblinking. A face that had been looking out of that frame for a very long time. Mara stood in the center of the room. She did not speak. The fire said something against its grate, The room held its old air around her. She looked at the painting for a long time, looked at the date in the corner, small and precise, the signature of a painter, and below it a year. A year that was not 10 years ago, not 20, not a number that made immediate sense to a person standing in a room in the present century. "That's you," she said. It was not a question. "Yes," Calix said. She turned to look at him. He was standing at the edge of the room, near the bookshelves, not near the fire, not near the portrait. He was watching her the way she had watched the painting, with attention and patience and no performance of either. That painting is, she did the arithmetic. It didn't resolve into anything her experience had prepared her for. That painting is very old. "Yes," he said. She looked at him, at the face that was the face in the painting, at the eyes that were the color of old amber in oil paint, and the color of real amber in firelight, and apparently the same color in both, separated by more years than she was immediately able to process. "How old are you?" she asked. He told her. He said a number. She heard it, and it landed the way things landed when they were true and impossible at the same time, not with a crash, not with a scene, but with a quiet weight, like a stone placed very carefully on a surface that it changed simply by being on. She turned back to the portrait. She was quiet for a while. The fire moved and the room held them, and outside, faintly, the string quartet was still playing. Still playing. The music was very far away and very small from here, like something heard through water. "Dorian's family knows," she said. "His family has known for a long time," Calix said. "They made an agreement once with someone in my family's sphere. It goes back further than Dorian, further than his father." She looked at the portrait, at the face looking back at her from a different century. "Is that why he was afraid?" she asked. "Dorian is afraid of many things," Calix said. "Some of them he has good reasons for, some of them he has inherited reasons for. The two are not always the same." She turned to face him fully. Calix Dren stood in the firelight room and looked back at her, and the silence between them was not empty. It was the kind of silence that was full of everything that had been said already, and everything that had not been said yet, and the specific quality of the air between two people who were both deciding something. She was not afraid. She made note of it again, the same inventory, the same measurement, not afraid, not running, not pretending. "What are you?" she asked, not harshly, not dramatically, the way you ask a question when you want the actual answer. He was quiet for a moment. The fire moved. "Something old," he said. "Something that has lived through most of what fills the books in this room. Something with a title no one will say out loud." "In some circles," he said, "yes." She looked at the books, at the shelves of them, the centuries of them, the accumulated knowledge of rooms like this one, in houses like this one, held in spines she could not read from where she stood. She looked at the fire. She looked at the portrait. She looked at him. "Will you say it?" she asked, out loud. He looked at her, those eyes that had been watching the world from that face since before anyone currently living was born. "Not yet," he said, "not tonight." "Why not tonight?" "Because," he said, "some words change what comes after them. And I would like what comes after this particular evening to be chosen carefully, by both of us." She heard that. Both of us. She stood in the quiet old room with the fire and the portrait and the bookshelves, and the weight of a secret she now held in her hands without fully knowing its shape. And she thought about the word carefully, about the choosing, about what it meant to be offered a choice by someone who had watched enough of history to know how choices went. "I'm going to need some time," she said. "I have time," he said. She almost laughed, almost. "That's either very reassuring or very alarming." "Probably both," he said. She nodded. She stood. She looked at the portrait one more time, at the face that was identical to the face in front of her, at the eyes that had been amber for centuries. "All right," she said. She did not elaborate on what the all right meant. She wasn't sure yet. She knew it was not all right in the sense of everything being resolved. It was all right in the sense of I am still here, I am still looking, I have not left the room. That was a beginning. She thought that beginnings, if you were in a room with someone who had seen enough of them, might mean something different than they had before tonight. She turned toward the door. "Mara," he said. She stopped. Be careful with what you tell people, he said. About tonight, about this room. She looked back at him over her shoulder. Are you asking me to keep a secret? I'm asking you, he said, to be selective. There's a difference. She considered that. The firelight moved against the walls. The portrait watched without blinking. Outside, very faintly, the string quartet finished something and began something else. I'm very good at selective, she said. I know, he said. She looked at him. How do you know that? You've known me for 4 hours. He looked at her and something moved across his face that was not the edge of a smile, and not quite the absence of one, something older than amusement, something that had outlasted many of the things amusement usually attached itself to. Some things, he said, are apparent without time. She held that. She held it the way you hold something fragile, carefully, aware of the weight. Then she went back out into the corridor, back toward the ballroom, back toward the light and the music and the room full of people who did not know what she now held in her hands. She walked with her spine straight and her chin at the angle she had practiced. This time it required no practice at all. Dorian found her within 3 minutes of her return to the ballroom. She had expected it. She had walked back into the light from the corridor with the specific awareness of a person who knows the room is going to rearrange itself around them the moment they reappear in it, and she had composed her face into something that was not a story. She was at the water table pouring herself a glass when he appeared at her elbow. He said nothing for a moment. He stood beside her and looked at the room and gave the impression of a man deciding how to begin, which was unusual for Dorian, who was generally someone for whom beginning was easy and ending was complicated. Where did you go? He asked. For a walk, she said. With him. She did not answer that one. She drank her water. Mara, his voice had dropped, not to a whisper Dorian considered whispering beneath him, but to the specific register of 2 people only, the one that excluded the room by its pitch alone. I told you to stay away from him. You suggested it, she said. I don't take suggestions as instructions anymore. You'll recall that was actually one of the things that, she stopped herself, picked up the thread of the sentence and put it back down. We've had this conversation. This is different, he said. She looked at him, at the specific discomfort that was on his face again, that almost fear that she had identified and catalogued, and was now looking at from the other side of a corridor, and a room full of books, and a portrait that had no business being as old as it was. I know it's different, she said. He looked at her. Something shifted in his expression. What did he tell you? We talked, she said. What about? Old things, she said, and watched his face. She watched the color change on it, very slightly, not dramatically. Just a slight change, the kind of change that happened when someone was trying very hard not to have the reaction they were having. She watched it, and she understood several things at once in the way that you sometimes understood several things at once when you were very tired and very alert at the same time, and the room was full of information you had been collecting all evening. She understood that Dorian's fear was real, not manufactured, not a performance. She understood that it was old, that eye.